on Sky News Australia. This is the Rita Panahi Show.
Good evening and welcome to the Rita Panahi Show. Coming up tonight, I speak to the man fighting to end one of the biggest medical scandals of our time. We'll look at the rift between Liberal senators Alex Antic and Maria Kovacic and the AFL's deepening drug crisis, with the league under pressure to scrap its deliberately flawed illicit drug policy. Army Horowitz joins me from the US with the latest Trump-induced MSNBC meltdown. And talking about Lefties Losing It, we have another bumper edition featuring this young lady who is a UN climate advisor.
The climate crisis is man-made. And it's not just man-made, it's white man-made. It is a result of capitalism, years of colonialism, years of racial oppression.
More of that later. Let's bring in Daniel Wild, Deputy Executive Director at the Institute of Public Affairs. Dan, let's start with this story from Sky News political editor Andrew Clennell. He revealed this morning that Liberal senators Alex Antic and Maria Kovacic had an ugly party room spat about the issue of gender dysphoria. Kovacic even complained to the party leadership about Antic. As we've spoken about many times on this program, Senator Antic is pushing for a Senate inquiry into the treatment of gender dysphoria, particularly for children. Kovacic and a few other small L Liberals joined Labor and the Greens to vote against Antic's proposals. She's reportedly claimed that his advocacy in this area is all about politics and boosting his political credentials. I don't exactly know how that's a criticism, but good on her. I do wonder, though, who leaked this story and what they hope to gain from it.
Well, who knows? I mean, I know Antic has said that this is the ultimate sort of insider story, that who cares in the real world about it. But there is an important policy point here, and Senator Antic is somebody who stands up. He speaks the truth on things. He's always going to be a lightning rod for criticism because he does that. On this particular issue, he's been a leader, both in his state of South Australia and nationally. His position is the right position from a policy perspective, which is that we need to have a proper inquiry and look into what is happening with gender dysphoria and the medicalisation of that matter. So, look, on the policy front, he's 100% right. Like I say, he sticks his neck out. He's happy to have a debate. And, he's always going to be someone who's criticised, but I've got to say you can't fault him when it comes to his arguments.
Well, he's on the right side of history. You only have to look at what's happening in the UK, America, Scandinavia. If they think this damages Alex Antic, then they're without a clue. I would say the overwhelming majority of Liberal politicians, as well as Liberal voters, coalition voters, back him on this issue. And it seems that we've got these few loud Liberals, or Liberals in name only, linos I call them, who are really frustrating efforts for the party to differentiate itself to Labor on these crucial issues. Now, you might call them their culture war issues, but they're actually issues of consequence. And if you don't protect cultural issues, then, why are you in politics?
Well, what's the point? And this is not just a culture war issue. This is about the family and family values. It's about parental autonomy over decisions, consequential, lifelong decisions that will affect their children. It touches on so many aspects of our society. And you're right to talk about differentiation. Families are crying out for political leadership on this issue, on school choice, on religious freedom. And now is the time for the coalition to speak to those people that have been left behind by the political system.
Now, we've got a new AG. I don't know how excited you are about this. GG, I should say, Governor-General. Sam Moyston's going to be the next Governor-General. And I've got to say, you have to hand it to Labor. They do not waste an appointment. They make sure every single one is on their side, pushing their agenda. Here's another leftist appointment, climate warrior, made all sorts of comments during COVID lockdowns, which I don't think she would be very proud of today. Maybe she would be, who knows. But you compare that, Dan, to the Liberals and the appointment of figures like Ita Buttrose as ABC chair, or Julie Inman-Grant as the E-Safety Commissioner. They just continuously seem to make the wrong calls. And whatever you say about Labor, they back their people, they back their own agenda and make sure the people they appoint are singing from the same hymn book.
Labor play to win, the coalition play to sit in office. That's the reality at a federal level. Labor are they may have only been in government for a quarter of the time since World War II, but they get the job done from their own ideological perspective. In terms of the substance of the appointment, I'd say that the Prime Minister has brought shame on our nation in this appointment. It's a divisive appointment. Basically, we now have a woke HR bureaucrat, anti-monarchist, who is Governor General, which is an important figure in our society. She's not going to be able to represent our nation with any fidelity on the international stage. As you pointed out, she is an activist. Now, that's perfectly fine. If you want to be an activist, that's fine. The role of Governor General should be impartial. Whatever your views are, that's fine, but leave them at the door and discharge your responsibilities in a proper, impartial manner. I just don't think this appointment's going to do that, and Australians will not support it.
Well, yeah, you're absolutely right. It is their head of state, and they should be apolitical at the very least. And this is someone whose track record isn't apolitical, no matter how they like to paint it. The comments are on the public record. But I think she's also a bit of a media darling. So I do wonder how much scrutiny there will be when she deviates from this apolitical framework she's supposed to work within.
Well, it's a good point, because this will give us an insight into how a republic could work if we had one, where you have division between the Prime Minister and the President. If she's going to continue to act in a political role,
she's on message with the Prime Minister. So we're not going to have too much of a conflict
until she's not. Right? This is always the challenge. So it'll be interesting to see what happens if she goes off script with a different message from the government. Well, that's why the monarchy that we have is good. You don't have divided sovereignty. So the plus of this, it may give people an insight into how divisive a republic can be.
Now, the AFL are being called out for their illicit drug policy, which is really a PR policy to hide drug use from the public and from the World Anti-Doping Agency, it seems. I've been writing about this for a decade while the football media was cheering on this madness, but the whole thing has blown up in the past couple of weeks. And Dan, we now have anti-doping expert Dick Pound likening the AFL's policy. I think he said it's reminiscent of the methods East Germany and Soviet Russia used in the 20th century. Goodness me, Dan. I don't know how the AFL are going to spin their way out of that. That is pretty damning.
It is damning, and they're trying pretty hard to spin their way out. I mean, I think this goes all the way up to the chairman, Richard Goyder. I mean, surely he's got to step down over this. He's the chairman of a failed company in Qantas, divisive, promoting the woke voice to Parliament. He's now, basically allowing this to go ahead with the AFL. There's got to be a serious change to the top brass of what's happening, because, as with so many things, that the cover-up is worse than the crime. And so far, the AFL is basically sticking to its line that it's about player welfare. They always hide behind mental health. There's no doubt that there are issues there, but you cannot use that as an excuse for what is clearly a disastrous policy. And
I think it was never about player welfare. It was about hiding the amount of illicit drug use amongst AFL players from the public, because it's very poor for their image and they're obsessed with their image. I mean, if it was really about player welfare, they would make sure the clubs knew about this issue. So at least they could take measures to support a player who may be going through a crisis. And you do really wonder about parents who send off their 17, 18-year-old boys to a club without any idea that club might be having all sorts of illicit drug problems running through their ranks, and they're sending their son, perhaps interstate, to join that.
Well, that's right. And I think it gets to a bigger issue with the AFL, which is these days it's basically a front for the corporates and the advertisers and the political class. Almost every single decision they've made over the last 10 to 20 years has not been in the interest of the football community or the fans. It's catering towards the corporates and the advertising revenue, which is why they're not dealing with this head on.
Yes, and they were also on board the Yes campaign.
Of course they were.
Heavily.
Same-sex marriage and all the rest of it.
All of it. Now, economists are questioning solar power subsidies, saying they're unwarranted. Anthony Albanese last week promised $1 billion in taxpayer funds to build Australia's solar panel manufacturing capacity. But even the leftist think tanks are questioning this handout. Grattan Institute Energy Program Director Tony Wood said the spending reflected an ideological desire to bolster manufacturing rather than a policy based on economics. And Dan, let's be frank, it's not like our solar manufacturing industry is ever going to be able to really compete with the cheap Chinese options. We've got one of the highest paid workforces in the world, and China's using Uyghur slave labour. So like, to pretend that we're going to be competitive in that arena, I think is fanciful.
Well, that's right. And look, Tony Wood is a serious operator. He's been in the game for a long time. The Grattan Institute is far to the left. They've been advocating renewables since day dot. If they're saying that there's a problem, you know that there's a real problem in the system. I think Tony Wood also said that it's been a bloodbath in terms of the solar manufacturing and renewables manufacturing in Australia. So this gets to a really big issue, which is you've got the Prime Minister and the Energy Minister out in the Hunter Valley because they're scared of losing those seats. 70% no vote in the Hunter, so they've turned against the Prime Minister. They're saying, well, we're going to have this industry that'll create jobs, but the local community knows that's not true. There's high-paid full-time jobs right now that exist in coal mining. They sustain those communities. This is not going to get off the ground, even with $1 billion in government money. And we just need a whole rethink. Net zero doesn't work. It's outsourcing our critical energy overseas to China. We've just got to get back to basics with our energy system. But sadly, this government continues its ideological pursuit.
And the question has to be asked, if renewables are the future, if they really are the cheapest source of energy and the way for advanced economies to go, then why do they need government handouts? Why do they need these subsidies? Surely investors would be flocking to back something that is undeniably the future, if you listen to Chris Bowen.
Well, that's right. They've never been commercially viable on a mass scale. They can play a role on your rooftop, sure, but in terms of powering an industrial economy, they can't get the job done. And this goes back to the year 2000 when the renewable energy target first came in, or the Paris Climate Agreement later. Every single step of the way, the only way their market penetration has increased, as you identify, is either through subsidies or favourable regulation that puts them ahead of other, more effective, cheaper forms of energy. That's why our bills are going up.
Yes, and I don't think it also passes the pub test when you've got these billionaires investing in renewables and then you've got taxpayers kicking in funds as well. No, thank you. Now, let's go to the US. There's a new variant of the Trump derangement virus. Now they're claiming that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy in the US. They've been saying that for some time. But they were actually fact-checked on this by a former Democrat, now an independent, Robert F. Kennedy, who on air called out the CNN host for the hyperbole and scaremongering.
But do you really believe that when people talk about the threat to democracy that Trump poses, do you really think that that is an equal evil to Biden?
I mean, listen, I can make the argument that President Biden is a much worse threat to democracy. And the reason for that is President Biden is the first candidate in history, the first president in history that has used the federal agencies to censor political speech, so to censor his opponent. I can say that because I just won a case in the Federal Court of Appeals and now before the Supreme Court that shows that he started censoring not just me. 37 hours after he took the oath of office, he was censoring me. No president in the country has ever done that. The greatest threat to democracy is not somebody who questions election returns, but a president of the United States who used the power of his office to force the social media companies, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, to open a portal and give access to that portal to the FBI, to the CIA, to the IRS, to CISA, to NIH, to censor his political critics.
Oh, CNN wouldn't have liked that. A lot of their audience would have never heard that. What sort of a factor is he going to be in the presidential race? Is he going to hurt Trump more and take voters from him or Biden?
I think he'll hurt Biden more. The reason for that is because if you're a Trump voter, you're a Trump voter, right? They're not leaving Trump. So I think he's more of a threat to Biden. I think he knows that. So attacking Biden is going to help his leverage for something down the line. The other point is he's picked as his VP candidate someone who's fairly far to the left. So he could have gone with a more right-leaning candidate.
He's gone with a Tulsi Gabbard,
someone like that, yeah.
And that would have been palatable to Republicans or Republicans who don't like Trump. But his VP choice, I think, has put an end to that.
I think so. Look, and he has a history of pretty far-left views, but I will give him credit on misinformation and censorship and also on the dramatic COVID overreach. He has been someone who's been willing to speak out on those issues. But on election night, I think that at the moment, this will hurt Biden more than Trump.
I'm in agreement with you 100% there, Daniel Wild. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
The divisive voice to Parliament was strongly rejected by Australians, but several state Labor governments have failed to recognise the will of the Australian people. And it seems many, if not most, Indigenous Australians reject this racial division too, after more than 90% of eligible Indigenous South Australian voters declined to cast their vote in the state's first voice election. The apathy to the race politics employed by the leftist elite could not be more clear. We saw similar disinterest in Victoria with the elections for the First Peoples Assembly. Joining me now is Indigenous Forum Director at the Centre of Independent Studies, Warren Mundine. Warren, are you surprised by the lack of turnout in Victoria and now South Australia? South Australia, they only had less than 10%, less than 3,000 votes cast.
Well, it's similar to organisations that have been set up over the years. ADSIC had never got a majority of Aboriginals and Torres Strait Islanders to vote and support it. They were all in the, double digits, low 10%, 15% levels. Then you have the New South Wales Land Council elections, they're in similar numbers as well. Then you've got Victoria, 2 elections in Victoria still haven't got over 7% of people voting for it. And now South Australia with 10%. We did some work on the Northern Territory polling booths, which had a majority of Aboriginals in them, and you're lucky to get 25, probably 18 to 25 to 40% at the most who voted in the last referendum. So Aboriginals have rejected it by walking away from these things. I don't know why, the left has got this crazy idea that these bodies represent Aboriginal people. No. Aboriginal people want to get their people to be able to run and be elected to Parliament like every other Australian and be part of the Australian mix. They don't want to be separated with these governance, other governance people. We got people who got 6 votes and 40 votes. There's one bloke who got on the ADSIC on 36 votes on a national vote, and they're supposed to be walking around saying we represent Aboriginal people. No, you don't. National Party, Liberal Party and Labor Party people get more votes for them from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders than his so-called Aboriginal representatives.
Well, you're 100% right there. It's very hard to make the case that there's any sort of mandate here. We've got 12 candidates who got elected with under 20 votes each, and one of them had 6 votes. So if you can get elected with 6 votes, really, that's not any sort of representation. We've also found out these yes-aligned campaign groups, how much they spent on trying to push the voice through. All the usual suspects, millions spent by big banks, supermarkets, mining giants, all sorts of lefty philanthropic elites, and they failed, Warren. The No campaign had a fraction of the funding of the Yes campaign, and yet it still managed to win in every state. And yet we see this ideological push continue. It seems there's been no acknowledgement of the referendum result we've just had.
Well, not only every state, but also in the Northern Territories we won. And then the only place where they got a vote was the ACT, and which, if you think there's a Canberra bubble, that sort of proves it. Look, these people are totally out of touch with the Australian people. They have no clue what the Australian people want, and they're trying to ram down our throats what Aboriginal people throats and down the wider Australian community throats, what they see is best for us. We saw it this year with Woolworths with the Australia Day. People know that I was a bloke who wanted to move the date so we could all celebrate. But I've come to the conclusion now, even if we move the date, these blokes don't want to celebrate. They just hate Australia. And they're just trying to pull this country apart and divide it. And now we're seeing it through these, these state-based referendum. All this money they're spending, we could have had, more police, more education, and which could have stopped this crime rate, which is rampaging across Australia at the moment.
Well, it must break your heart to see what's happening in Alice Springs and elsewhere. The footage out of there is shocking. You can't believe that is Australia. Some of the violence is just extreme, and you feel so desperately sad for the kids who are growing up in that environment.
Look, I'm really sad for the kids. You know, my heart isn't broken in regard to the politicians. You know, we got to start getting rid of politicians who run down this line. Oh, we spend more money, things will get better. Or if we had a voice, things will get better. Well, guess what? They're getting worse, and they're getting worse by the day. And now it's about time these blokes woke up, and these women woke up to themselves and actually started doing the real things that need to be done, which is about, you know, all the money that's been spent, we need a proper performance review and audit. So if they get X dollars for Y, that Y is actually done. Kids are getting to school. States and territory governments have been getting away with this for years and getting money, and Aboriginal kids, and you know, at 25%, 30% attending school, and then you know, how are they going to get a job? How are they going to build a future for themselves? And we have to get the adults in to work and start building businesses and things that are happening, and make the community safe. Who's going to invest in a community where you're going to get a brick thrown through your shop window every day? Come on, you know, let these politicians stop mucking around and talking crap. I say to Chris Mims, you're in discussion about a voice in New South Wales, stop it. And I say to Mark Speakman, the leader of the opposition, stop it, and actually start focusing on the real stuff that needs to be done.
Well, I hope they're both listening to you. Warren Mundine, thank you so much for your time this evening. Still to come, MSNBC pushes another crazy conspiracy theory and a bumper edition of Lefties Losing It. That's up next. Welcome back, and now it's time for Lefties Losing It. Let's start with UN Climate Advisor Aisha Siddiqa, who has taken a momentary break from tweeting pro-Palestinian talking points to spew this utter racist garbage.
The climate crisis is man-made. And it's not just man-made, it's white man-made. It is a result of capitalism, years of colonialism, years of racial oppression.
Yes, it's white men causing all the environmental damage. Just ignore the fact that there are a number of Asian countries dumping their rubbish, tons of the stuff, directly into waterways. It's the white men and their capitalism we need to worry about. And pray tell, Aisha, how do we save the planet?
The way that we save our planet is when we protect the most vulnerable communities among us. And this includes Black trans women.
Black trans women, of course. That's the answer to everything, always. Now to more examples of the many failures of the US education system, including leading colleges. Watch here swimmer Riley Gaines, the woman who took a stand against being forced to compete against a male athlete, identifying as a female. Watch as she asks the simple question, what is a woman? Toddlers could answer this question better than these adults.
What would be your definition of the word woman?
That is a difficult question. I think it depends on one's own perspective. I think it has to do with the current, gender norms.
What is a woman?
I feel like every person has their own definition to that.
What would your definition be?
I mean, if you identify as a woman, then you're a woman.
What is a woman?
A lady that... Someone that does not have a certain private part, I guess. I don't know.
The last dude gave the most correct answer. A woman is an adult female human. It's not hard, folks. Now let's see the latest corporate to be targeted by the anti-Israeli lobby.
Boycott, boycott KFC! Boycott, boycott KFC! Boycott, boycott Israel! Boycott, boycott Israel! Boycott, boycott KFC! Boycott, boycott KFC! KFC, shame on you! KFC, shame on you! KFC, shame on you!
Oh, that just makes me feel like a bucket of chicken. But it's no laughing matter. In Pakistan, a crazed mob burned down a KFC outlet. The Pakistani authorities have arrested more than 50 people in relation to that bit of activism. Now to President Joe Biden, who failed to attend the funeral of fallen NYPD officer Jonathan Diller. He was in New York, but he was attending a fundraiser with Lizzo and Barack Obama and Bill Clinton. Couldn't spare an hour to attend the officer's funeral, but his administration has since held a press conference to criticise Donald Trump for travelling to New York to attend Jonathan Diller's funeral.
I don't think it was a deep personal connection between Donald Trump and Detective Diller that motivated Trump to attend the wake for this particular officer.
The pure chutzpah of this rotten administration, failing to show up or even just mention Officer Diller's name, but also having a go at the man who was there and brought enormous coverage to this young father's tragic death at the hands of a career criminal. Let's end Lefties with a trip down memory lane where those who did not have the COVID shot were maligned as dangerous monsters spreading death and disease. Here's part of a compilation put together by Milk Bar TV.
If hospitals get any more overcrowded, they're going to have to make some very tough choices about who gets an ICU bed. That choice doesn't seem so tough to me. Vaccinated person having a heart attack? Yes, come right on in. We'll take care of you. Unvaccinated guy who gobbled horse goo? Rest in peace, Wheezy.
The people who are not getting vaccines, who are believing the lies on the internet instead of science, it's time to start changing them.
The risk posed to all of us by unvaccinated people get angry.
Jennifer Aniston is doubling down on cutting non-vaccinated people out of her life.
I surround myself, and I'm surrounded with love and honor, and certainly those that are vaccinated.
West Australian parents who are unvaccinated will be banned from seeing their own sick children in the state's hospitals. And people have had time, you know. Yeah. I mean, really.
He says, the unvaccinated, I really want to piss them off, and so we're going to continue doing so until the end.
And just say, now it's mandatory to get vaccinated. Them, their freedom. I want my freedom to live.
Being held accountable for your own actions isn't called discrimination. It's called being, you wouldn't believe it, a goddamn bloody adult.
Calling for anti-vaxxers to be stripped of Medicare.
Anger is building among parents and vaccinated teachers as governments start to allow unvaccinated people to return to work. What will happen?
The virus is literally finding unvaccinated people.
Being called a pandemic among the unvaccinated.
The vaccination of the unvaccinated.
MSNBC lefties are losing it yet again, and again it's all about Donald Trump. Watch this meltdown about Trump's social media company, Truth Social, which started trading this week and boosting the former president's net worth, potentially by billions. But according to the MSNBC Brains Trust, this is proof of some grand conspiracy where nefarious forces are fixing the share price to boost the market value of this company. Got to tell you, these dummies failed Economics 101.
The whole thing is absurd. Why the SEC does not think there's some kind of stock manipulation going on, by the way, but clearly this is one of these almost meme-like stocks where there's clearly a group of people that are trying to push up the price to almost transfer money, potentially, to the former president. That's what's going on here. Now, the question is whether he can sell his shares.
Let's put this in perspective. Yeah. It is still valued at a number greater than what Harley Davidson, Bausch & Lomb are valued at. Those are companies that make products and make billions of dollars. Technically speaking, you would say this company is fakakta. It does not do anything, okay?
Joining me now is filmmaker and journalist Ami Horowitz. Ami, MSNBC, just keep providing more and more content for me. I do appreciate it. But What do you make of this latest episode of Trump Derangement Syndrome? Do you believe there is some sort of fix in to boost the market value of Truth Social?
I'm still fixating on her using the word fakakta. I'm still focused on that. Sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I did like that.
It's not about. I loved it. It's not about the value of the price. I mean, God, how many stocks have we seen that have gone up 100-fold, 500-fold, right? That's not the issue. The issue is, first of all, these are people who understand the financial markets, understand that, first of all, when you own a piece of a company, you're locked up, right? You are locked up after IPO for months afterwards, unable to sell your shares. And then even after the lockup is done, right, because they're talking about potentially this is wealth transfer to Trump to win the presidency, that even after the lockup is done, you just can't sell your shares in the market, then tank the entire stock price. But these people know it. They're in a financial show. They're talking about finance. They understand this works, but they don't care because they want to obfuscate the truth. But also what's so interesting is that they were, here, this is another example of lawfare, right? Another example of going outside the democratic process to win an election, right? The Democratic Party, the people upholding democracy, well, they will do anything to get somebody who they know they will lose in the democratic process to get them knocked out some other way. We saw it with Trump in terms of the legal operations against him across the country. And now we're seeing this MSNBC crew essentially saying, we want the SEC to get involved, and they want the SEC to do their dirty work. Again, they're trying to find any non-democratic process to get rid of Trump. They want to do an investigation on Trump so that, for whatever reason, they obviously want him to lose. That's what we're looking at here.
Absolutely. Now, the Biden White House are demanding Israel come clean on the killing of aid workers in an Israeli airstrike in Gaza. Our own Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, has also conveyed his outrage at the death of an Australian aid worker. Israel has admitted that the deaths of the 7 workers was a mistake that followed a misidentification. Ami, how is this story being treated in the US, and what do you make of the claims from pro-Palestinian activists that this was nothing out of the ordinary and Israel is reckless in selecting its targets?
This is so gross, so disgusting. First of all, this aid organization, which is led by Jose Andres, a famous celebrity chef, has been working hand in glove with Israel. So in fact, it's another example of Israel trying to get aid into Gaza, working with this organization in order to do that. They work very closely with them. The Israelis are heartbroken over what happened, but this was clearly a mistake. Israel said it seems like a mistake. Israel's investigating it. Hamas doesn't investigate an attack on civilians because that's their entire basis of operation. That's their modus operandi. But when Israel does it, they call for investigations. Look, understand something. 1/5 of all Israeli soldiers have been killed by friendly fire. One of the most famous incidents, Israel even killed their own hostages because when you're in war, this is what happens. This is not a war that Israel started. This is a war that was put upon Israel by Hamas. They're reacting to Hamas barbarity and atrocities. And guess what happens when that occurs? There is examples of civilians being killed by accident. This is a perfect example of that. But Joe Biden knows that. He is deliberately trying to misinterpret the truth because he's using it as a cudgel against Israel in order to push his gross, disgusting ceasefire that calls on Israel to stop prosecuting his war against Hamas without the hostages being released in total. This is what we're seeing here. This is why the faux outrage by the administration and the fake outrage by the news media outlets around America and around the world.
Now, Joe Biden's climate agenda has been dealt a big blow after a federal district court overturned a rule that required states to track and set reduction goals for greenhouse gas emissions from vehicles on highways. Ami, how big is this issue in the coming presidential election? Is climate change going to be a top tier issue, or is it ranked relatively low when you're talking about cost of living, the border crisis and inflation, all the issues that US cities are grappling with?
climate change. Oh, come on. Nobody cares about right now about climate change, considering all the things you just listed. Look, I'll tell you what's two things that's really interesting about this. First of all, it's the okay. Yes, there are issues involved, interesting issues involved in terms of federalism and state rights versus federal rights. We've been dealing with this issue a lot now with this administration because the administration is trying to push federal agendas onto states. We talked about the border with Texas. This is another example of that. So that on itself is an interesting dynamic. A constitutional issue that I think it's important to deal with. But frankly, Rita, it just shows you how tone deaf this president is. Never mind that the issue isn't climate change in terms of what voters care about. Voters are looking at inflation, in particular, the rise in cost of gas prices. Yet what is he doing? He's trying to push a legislation, a regulation from the federal government that will do nothing but continue to push up gas prices at a time where that's what people care about. Climate change isn't the number one issue, but inflation certainly is. But he is so tough. This is why he's so bad. Rita, he's so bad at this. This is why he's losing to Donald Trump, right? He's getting killed because he's pushing stupid things that people don't care about. The things they do care about, he's making it worse for them.
Well, one of the issues they do care about, particularly in a lot of blue cities, is crime. You're a New Yorker, and I'm hoping you can enlighten me on what's happening there with women getting punched in the face, just walking down the street and being randomly punched in the face. This is a trend that was reported on social media. Now it's hit the mainstream media. Here's one of the victims.
It is a random, unprovoked, vicious attack on a 57-year-old woman in Brooklyn. Watch as the suspect ignores another man walking nearby, then punches the woman in her face, causing her to stumble backwards.
What happened? Why you hitting me? Why you hitting me? I was bleeding a lot. I'm so scared, I'm so afraid.
Dulce Pichardo was on the receiving end of that punch. Her mouth now wired shut, her face fractured in several places.
It's not the first time I've asked you this, Army, but what is going on in New York?
No, crime is out of control. There's no question about it. I mean, when you walk in the subways themselves, the subways are just dirtier, they're scarier. In the streets, look, you just can't walk. I tell my kids, you can't walk around with headphones on. You can't walk around looking at your screen. You got to be aware. Your head's got to be on a swivel. That's what's going on here. Although you showed the one clip of that one woman, but if you look at the TikTok videos of what's happening, look, this is not funny at all. But if it was funny,
oh no,
I think if you look at it's all kind of white single women for the most part in New York, i.e., Democratic base, Democratic voters. I think it's fascinating that they are now saying, what's happening? What's going on? What's going on is you voted in these people into New York who are pushing these bail regulations and other ridiculous left-wing policies in our cities, which is leading to massive increases in crime. You are responsible for this. You're looking at me like, I don't know what's going on. It's going on because you guys voted for it. I'm sorry to say it. And by the way, they're always starting the TikTok with, hey guys. I'm like, I don't know, if I got punched in the face, I wouldn't be in a hey guys mood, right? I don't know. That's always a weird way to start a TikTok, but what do I know? I'm banned from TikTok. I don't know anything about it.
You're right there. You're right there. I mean, you keep voting for crazy, you're going to get crazy. And that's what they've got in New York and other parts of the country. And I can't see them changing their voting patterns anytime soon. Army Horowitz, thank you so much for your time this evening. Still to come, we speak to a man leading the charge against what has been dubbed the biggest medical scandal of our time. And he has a warning for Australian health authorities. Welcome back. There are many lies told by the trans lobby and their propaganda arm, their many media mouthpieces. One of those is that so-called trans children that do not receive medical intervention to change their genders are going to die. But we're also told that kids under 18 are not suffering permanent damage from irreversible surgeries like double mastectomies and what is called bottom surgery. These lies are being called out by detransitioners like Chloe Cole and Layla Jane.
I've had side effects from all three. I've had side effects from the puberty blockers, the cross-sex hormones, as well as the double mastectomy. I don't know whether I'll be able to conceive or if I'll be able to carry safely even. And even from the surgery, I've had some pretty bad side effects. Like I'll never be able to breastfeed, and I was informed of this, but I was allowed to make this decision when I didn't really understand just what that meant. I mean, I was 15 years old. I was just a kid.
What age were you when they put you on puberty blockers?
I was 12 years old.
12 years old, doctors gave you a drug called Lupron. This drug has been used to chemically castrate sex offenders, pedophiles in prison, but they prescribed it to you to stop your hormones. Is that correct?
Correct. At 12 years old.
Do you believe that you were given informed consent about the risks of puberty blockers?
I don't think so. I think, you know, it was spoken of very lightly. You know, I mean, they really did say it's just a pause. There were some slight concerns about my bone development, but, you know, they just told me to take some vitamin D.
Both these girls and another called Luca Hain are being represented by the Centre for American Liberty as they sue the doctors, hospitals and gender clinics that pushed them into cross-sex hormones and surgery when they were minors. Eric Sell is from the Centre for American Liberty. He joins me now. Where does the fight for justice start with cases like this? What are your prospects for success, given that there was consent given for these surgeries by the parents, presumably, and the teenagers themselves?
Well, Rita, I think justice is holding these doctors accountable for feeding these young girls lies that these are reversible procedures or that this is the only way out from their depression, their anxiety, their sad feelings that they had. I mean, these are kids going through a very tough time, and they find online that this is the answer, that they are a different gender and that they need medical intervention to make them happy. And these doctors did not fully inform them about the consequences of their actions, and they should be held accountable for it. And we think that they did not obtain informed consent from these individuals. And we think that we have a very high likelihood of success in holding these doctors accountable under American law.
Well, can a 13 or a 15-year-old give informed consent for surgeries that have lifelong consequences? As we heard there from Chloe Cole, I spoke to her on this network. She'll never be able to breastfeed. She had her healthy breasts removed as part of this surgery. She also fears that she's been left sterile. But what are the parameters around that? At what age is it considered informed consent? Do you need to be 18 or have a thorough understanding of the lifelong consequences of these surgeries?
All of our clients needed their parents to consent for them. So their parents were involved with these conversations, but their parents were lied to. Our clients were lied to. These doctors told them that this was the only way out. You can either have a dead daughter or a live son. And it's just horrible. So this isn't a situation where the doctors sat our clients down and walked them through, here is how drastic these decisions are. Here's what the consequences are. Here's what you're giving up. They told them this is the only way out. That's not informed consent. That's manipulation. And now you have these young girls who are never going to be able to live a normal life as a female. They're going to have lifelong medical consequences because of these decisions they made when they were so young, because they thought that they were trapped and that this was the only solution for them. So these doctors manipulated them, and they did not obtain informed consent.
Is it mainly girls who are detransitioning? Do you know what the gender breakup is? And are you expecting more people to come to you to represent them now that they know there is a way to seek justice?
Sadly, it is primarily young girls, to the tune of, I've seen some statistics that say 90% of young kids who are transitioning are females. And I think a lot of it is because they, are going through puberty. They're seeing online, images that they don't ever think are going to be obtainable, and they feel trapped and they want to change who they are. They want to mask their feelings with a new identity. And sadly, it is often young girls, and in many cases, young girls with autism disorder and other mental health disorders that are, prompting them to seek these medical interventions. So what we're trying to do here with Chloe's case, with Layla's case, with Luca's case, is to create a blueprint for individuals who were manipulated by their doctors to hold their doctors accountable for what they did. So we are absolutely hoping that more detransitioners will reach out to us at the Center for American Liberty and seek help so we can help them find a lawyer to go after the doctors that manipulated them and lied to them.
Well, in Australia, there is little transparency about how many children are being treated, what sort of treatments they're receiving in public hospitals and private ones too. What advice do you have for Australian health authorities who are, well, blindly following this gender-affirming model?
Don't listen to WPATH, first and foremost. That is an organization of activists who are not basing their so-called standards of care on any credible science, really. The foundation that so much of this has been built on has been a foundation of lies, and it's coming crumbling down. And, you know, it's great to see that information is coming out that shows that these studies that supposedly supported the notion that performing a double mastectomy on a 13-year-old girl is somehow good for her is all bogus. So Australian health authorities that are looking to WPATH and other organizations that say that they have evidence to support these procedures as beneficial, that's all false. They need to do their due diligence. And really at this point, that means waiting to see what additional studies show with respect to, the gender affirming care that has been performed on individuals. Is it going to be beneficial in the long term? What are the consequences of that going to be? And then only then make public policy decisions and medical decisions before making drastic procedural decisions on young kids. So that would be my recommendation for these Australian health authorities.
Now, the Centre for American Liberty is also representing an 82-year-old woman, Julie Jammers, who was banned for life from her local YMCA for expressing concerns that a man in a woman's swimsuit was using the woman's locker room. She says she was berated by staff, and since then, she says she's suffered mob-like attacks, public humiliation, and widespread mendacious reporting. If this had been the 17th century, I would have been burnt at the stake. I have been active in this community for 40 years, and my hope is that my credibility is restored. This seems incredible that a woman, an upstanding woman, can't speak up about something that makes her feel unsafe without copping this sort of treatment.
Yeah, it is truly horrible what happened here. And I think this just is another example of the blind loyalty that so many have to the pro-trans position. I mean, there's absolutely no common sense in these situations. Everyone is so afraid of being labeled a transphobe or a bigot that they would rather kick an 80-year-old woman out from the local pool that she's been using for decades simply because she objects to a biological male being in the women's locker room. There's absolutely no sense behind it. We have a First Amendment that protects free speech in the United States, and this was a violation of that constitutional right that Julie has. She has the right on government property. It was run by the YMCA, but this is government property, and she has the right to object to this policy. She was an advocate and counselor for survivors of domestic violence for most of her adult life, and she's been trained to look out for threats. And a biological male in a women's locker room is often the sign of a threat. So Julie spoke up, and she was banned for it, and that's unlawful. That's unconstitutional under American law.
Well, good on you for supporting her, because I would think the overwhelming majority of her community and just everyday Americans would back her and back her calling out something that made her feel uncomfortable. Eric Sell, thank you so much, and hopefully we'll speak to you again as these cases progress.
Thank you so much for having me.
That's it from me tonight. Up next is News Night. I'll see you at 11 tomorrow. Good night.